Welcome to the Creative Coach Podcast. I'm Wade Kingsley. And today I've got a special guest. So as you know, in this series, I am interviewing other people. So I've spoken to myself a lot on this podcast. Well, to be accurate, I've been talking to you, but I've actually felt like maybe it's time to bring some other people in on the conversation. And with creativity, there's lots of different angles you can look at it through. It's not just the traditional brainstorming or design thinking methods. It's actually about creators, and it's also about creative paths for people who maybe don't feel that confident to create. And maybe there's different stages of your life journey where you do and you don't. So today I'm talking to Nadia Mahjouri. Now, Nadia is an author, a counsellor, but the thing that just amazed me when I read her bio is that she was also once a koala. Hello, Nadia.
Hi, Wade. That is a unique part of my bio.
How are you once a koala, and why aren't you a koala now?
That's true. Maybe once a koala, always a koala. I was a koala for the Wilderness Society many, many years ago, and my job was to dress up in a koala suit and carry around a bucket and collect donations for the Wilderness Society. So yes, and yeah, it was all right unless it was a very hot day, in which case, you know.
would get hot in the suits. I've always wondered, are people nice to you when you're wearing those costumes?
Depends. I have a very fond memory of being picked up and carried down the road during the Grand Prix in Adelaide at one point in the mid-90s. So, you know, in my koala suit, kind of going, "Put me down," you know. I think they were a Bucks night or something, having a great old time.
Oh, that would have been a sight to see. Now, you're an author, so I'm going to talk to you about your book shortly. But the first place I want to start is being a counsellor and specialising in maternal health. Talk to me about creativity and what the mythology would be, or the legend would be around something called mum brain. Does mum brain real? Does it exist?
Look, I think that most women experience some sense of overwhelm, you know, and I think really mum brain is what we, you know, the word we use to explain the fact that you have so many things on the go, so many tabs open in your brain in the first year of, you know, or any stage in motherhood, but particularly early on. I think that's that sense of kind of just too many things and not enough sleep. So I think the mythology generally is that, you know, I'll have a baby and I'll never be able to do anything at all. Or certainly that's what a lot of women go into motherhood with, this fear of, that, you know, my brain will be forever ruined and I'll just be mushy and foggy forever. And, you know, there's certainly a truth to a part of that for a while, that, you know, we can feel pretty overwhelmed and pretty exhausted. But, you know, that's not forever. And that's not the whole story either.
Yeah, exactly. And in terms of the work that you do in maternal mental health, what are some of the common things that you see or experience or hear stories of as it relates to creative thinking or creativity? You know, are there people who felt highly creative and then they had a baby and felt different, or vice versa?
I mean, it does vary, and it varies. There are a few factors in what makes it different. Often women, you know, put off motherhood thinking that will be the end for their creative life, particularly if they've kind of considered themselves, they've been writers, they've been creatives, and there's this fear that, you know, I'll have a child and I'll never be able to create again. Of course, that's not actually always the whole story. And what I often see is that after a period of kind of restructuring of their life, what we'll see is that women will actually end up moving, kind of rearranging their identity in their life to kind of live more in line with the values that they have. So it's also often, weirdly, people who've never thought of themselves as creative will have a baby and kind of go, actually, I don't want to go back to the corporate job I've always been in. What I really want to do is, you know, paint. What I really want to do is write. And so actually, you know, you see women, you know, starting to turn towards these more kind of creative pursuits as they kind of, you know, start to reassess what's important in their life. And that moment where you're having, you know, your first, second, you know, in those early years of childbearing, they really are an opportunity for rethinking, recasting your identity, working out who is it that I want to be in the world, and what kind of person do I want to spend the rest of my life being.
And it's interesting too how people define creativity, isn't it? Because often, you know, we're told it's artistic pursuits, which of course it is. It is artistic pursuits, but it's much more than that. I mean, I can't think of any more fundamental creative act than creating another human. I mean, there's something
Right.
to be said for giving birth to. And if you think about the origins of the word create and where it comes from, it's
Yeah,
actually about birthing. It's actually about creating something that didn't exist before. And I know as a
exactly.
dad, I kind of felt different creatively after I had two kids, and that wasn't obviously a maternal thing for me. That was more of I look at the world differently now, or I feel
Mm.
differently about it. And do
Mm.
you think that with some of the women that you work with, is that a sensation that could actually be a source of inspiration to tap into?
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. I think motherhood and parenthood in general um, is an inherently creative, process and inherently creative pursuit. And also, importantly, you're talking about dads. It's actually not just the people that give birth that have these kind of changes in their identity, and even more than that, the changes in their brain. We see that caregivers, we see that dads that are engaged in the parenting, non kind of people that haven't birthed but nevertheless are caregivers, that the act of caregiving itself rewires the brain and kind of starts to change values and to really kind of, we see people starting to really rearrange their lives. And yeah, that creativity, sometimes it's an artistic process, but sometimes it's starting a new business.
Yeah,
Sometimes
right.
it's taking on, it is really a matter of what I see in women mainly who I work with, but certainly anyone who is newly in a caregiving role, is that they are asking themselves, who am I now, and how do I be the person I want to be for these children, into the future? How do I be the dad I want to be? What kind of life do I want to create for myself
Yeah.
and for my family?
Yeah, and I think, it's worth reflecting on that, because often we don't give ourselves credit for those everyday acts of creativity. I mean, if you're a parent
Mm.
and you've done Elf on the Shelf for more than one year, trust me, you tap into your creativity to get those things going, because once you've done all the tricks of year one, you're like, oh, damn it, now I have to do this again. And the mad doodling is there. Or I don't know, people PPTing
Yeah,
or
I
Elf
am
on the
a
Shelf.
wild permission giver though. Like, I give you permission to never do Elf on the Shelf. Your kid will be okay. Like,
Good, I'll take
if
that one. I'll
that's
remember that
if
next
that's
time.
what floats your creative boat, then go for it. But if it's not, there is you will do no damage to your children.
You'll be fine. Oh, that's good. And Nadia, on your podcast, you talk to writers who are navigating motherhood and a different stage of life with creative pursuits, in particular writing. But what's something that you've learnt through interviewing a lot of authors or even first-time writers?
I think that what we realize that if you want to create a kind of, you're writing to write a novel, or you're wanting to make a real, or you're wanting to build a business, whatever it is that you are aiming to create, you are going to need to commit to it. These, particularly in motherhood, particularly in parenthood, when you've got kids, it's not going to magically happen. You're not going to magically get the time for these things. It's not going to present itself. So there is a degree to which we need to make conscious choices around, I've spoken to writers that get up at 4 a.m. Now, I don't think that's necessary. I'm an author and I don't get up at 4 a.m. to write, but but it's finding that time. It's, I've spoken to writers that will be tapping out their working on their manuscript while they're watching basketball practice, or while they're
Wow.
dropping their, so it's that thing that we can't always kind of let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Okay, we don't get those 9 to 5 sit down at the computer and write kind of the dream, but we have to kind of commit to making the little steps, incremental steps every day. And it's incredibly impressive to me how many people manage to make that work, and it often feels like something that you do just for you. It's actually really lovely to have this whole nother world in your head that no one else is part of. It's like I just get to hang out with my imaginary friends. I mean, that's what I
That's a
talk
good
about when I'm
escape,
writing
isn't it?
fiction. I've got whole conversations happening, and it is lovely. And I had another woman talk to me, and so she said, when I was on maternity leave, it was actually really lovely that I had this writing project that I felt like was giving me the capacity to still be me, even though I'm in the midst of doing all of this kind of very heavy body work of kind of looking after little kids. At the same time, I have a creative project that allows my brain to kind of have something to chew over, and we've got something to talk about at the end of the day. that's
That's
not
great.
just
And
dirty nappies.
yeah, well, exactly, and that's the challenge sometimes, isn't it? Is that the monotony of parenthood, and I would say motherhood mostly, but parenthood
Mm,
as well, is that it's so repetitive and so routine, and when you're looking after other people, and I think a lot of people too, getting to a certain age, are looking after elderly parents as well as young kids,
mm,
and there's a task orientation to it, which can be quite deflating. And I notice in my coaching sessions that I do with parents, not just mothers, but with parents, is that notion of, you just said, that kind of thing that they've got to themselves, that little escape that they can have, that's their thing, and I think often with parenting we lose some of those things that we felt made up our own identity. I
yeah,
used to do this and I used to do that. Now we do all this stuff. But, an act of creativity, be it writing, painting, drawing, starting a business, as you said, anything that involves creating something that didn't exist. I love that
exactly.
notion that it's yours. You're creating
Yeah.
it as your baby in a sense.
Yeah, and there's this sense of kind of asserting your agency on the world. I am still a person. I am still someone that has something to contribute in my intellectual life. And how that seems to be the juggle that we're often trying to manage, is particularly when we've got young kids, is how does my intellectual life kind of get to live alongside this kind of beautiful kind of caregiving life that I have at home. It's nice to feel like, yeah, I'm able to contribute in both of those ways.
Absolutely. Now, you walk the walk. You're a mum and you've also an author. Tell us about your book.
So my novel Half Truth was released in February with Penguin Random House, and it was originally actually a creative project that I wrote. It was a family story, so it was one of those things. I didn't really care if it ever got published when I started writing it. I wanted to tell this story in case I dropped dead, so that my kids would have this story. And part of that was the story of my own life of traveling to Morocco to search for my father, who I'd never met, and discovering when I got there that he was a missing person. And I did that. I traveled to Morocco in the
Wow.
late 90s with my baby at that time, who was 4 months old, my first baby. I was a bit of a
Wow.
fool. And the other part of that story is, the other point of view is based on my grandmother, who I actually never met, my Moroccan grandmother. And she is an elderly Berber woman in the story, looking back over her life and thinking maybe she hasn't seen her firstborn son for 25 years. So she's wondering what she could have maybe done to keep him safe. And I used kind of the only things I knew about her, which were that she was married at 11. She was a child bride, and she
Oh,
had my
geez.
father at 13. So I was
Oh.
desperate to get to know her by imagining myself into her life. So
Mm.
it's very much a family project. But as I went through the process of writing it, I started to kind of share it out little bits here and there, and people started to say, "Oh, I think this has got legs." I think this might. And so it's been this wonderful journey for me to move into to getting a book deal, to getting it published, and now kind of out talking to readers, which is just the most glorious thing, to kind
Oh,
of realize
wonderful.
that this story that existed in my head and my head alone is now kind of being enjoyed and touching other people. So yeah, feel very
Oh,
lucky.
that's wonderful. Congratulations on that. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
we'll put the link to the book in our show notes for this episode. It's called Half Truth, published by Penguin Random House. Nadia, just to leave us with, let me just have a think about something that's on your mind at the moment and ask you about how you would relate creativity to someone listening to this podcast who maybe is feeling low in confidence or has had a change of life
Mm.
circumstance, be it becoming a mum or becoming a parent. What's one sort of thing you think kind of can help you break through the noise and get started on a project?
Oh, that's a really beautiful question. I often want to point out, when I'm talking about all these wonderful things you can do as a new mum, that these things don't come immediately,
Right.
and that sometimes there is a phase of, like, if you think about it, like you're going into your cocoon and you're a little caterpillar and you're going to come out as a butterfly, but in the middle there you've got to turn into mush, and so, and while you're turning into mush, it doesn't feel like something new's coming. It just feels like what you were is disintegrating. And do you know what I mean? Like, I know that sounds
Mm,
miserable, but
absolutely.
what
No,
I'm
I can. Yep.
but I'm trying to, I don't want, I don't would hate a new mum to hear this and say, oh my God, why haven't I written a novel? I'm struggling, just to get through the day. There is these processes take time, and there will be that butterfly, but just give yourself the space. and the gentleness. And if, because these things do take time. So be really gentle with yourself. And if the most creative thing you do today is brush your hair and put it up, then you've done a great job, and that's okay. Like, it doesn't have to happen quickly, but if you allow yourself just tiny little steps, follow your joy. So, I'm really loving, I want to paint that wall, beautiful. Or I'm writing a journal today and I'm just going to write my feelings out. Or, just tiny little steps, but be very, very gentle with yourself. And yeah, know that these things, it will happen, but it doesn't have to happen all at once.
Beautiful. That's a lovely note to leave us on. Thank you so much, Nadia. Appreciate you joining us on the podcast today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
And you'll find the link to Nadia's book and Nadia's website in our show notes. So please go and have a look at Nadia and check out her book. And also, great example, Nadia said that she didn't write the book with the intention of being a bestseller. It was for a family legacy. So whatever you go to create today, do it for yourself. Create something for yourself first, and you never know where it might lead. Catch you next week on the Creative Coach Podcast. Bye for now.